Tonight, a notorious serial killer is dead. Robert Pickton loses his life after a violent attack behind bars. The pig farmer who preyed on dozens of women.
He suffered at the end, in my view, hasn't suffered enough.
And the families whose pain lives on. What a historic verdict means for Donald Trump and the race for the White House.
If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone.
It's reckless. It's dangerous.
Plus, new economic numbers that might add up to a lower interest rate.
The Bank of Canada probably has a green light to start cutting it.
I realized that maybe I have a shot at winning, and I did.
Also, a major victory, one letter at a time.
Abseil.
ABSEIL.
And looking for the lights.
We might have some northern lights visible throughout Canada.
The forecast on where to see stunning images in the night sky.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. One of Canada's most notorious serial killers, Robert Pickton, has died after an attack 2 weeks ago by another inmate in a Quebec prison. Pickton preyed on women he lured from Vancouver's downtown east side to his rural pig farm, most of them Indigenous and involved in the sex trade. He was convicted in 2007 of 6 counts of second-degree murder, though the remains or DNA of 33 women were found on his property. He once bragged to an undercover officer that he had killed 49 women. The case was scrutinized by a public inquiry. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Andrew Johnson has the latest and a warning. This report contains details some may find disturbing.
Serial killer Robert Pickton ripped apart hundreds of lives, and now his is over.
I guess he suffered at the end somewhere along the line, but he still, in my view, hasn't suffered enough for all the deaths that he caused, all the women that are gone.
Rick and Lynn are the parents of Marnie Frey, one of the 6 women Pickton was convicted of murdering on his Port Coquitlam pig farm. They greet word of Pickton's death with little emotion.
I don't feel anything any different.
Pickton was being held in a special unit inside a maximum security prison in Quebec designed to keep him away from other inmates. But on May 19th, he was attacked, an assault that left him on life support. The Freys shared disturbing details that came from their lawyer.
The guy that assaulted him stabbed him first with a toothbrush in the neck, and then he broke a broom handle. And when you break something like a broom handle, you always get a sharp end. So he took the sharp end and he up into his skull.
Corrections Canada says the assault by an inmate is under investigation. Speaking not far from Pickton's farm, BC's public safety minister knows his death will reopen old wounds.
I'm not really thinking about Robert Pickton today. I'm thinking about the victims and their families and the trauma that they went through.
2 decades have passed since a police raid at the farm revealed the dismembered remains or DNA of dozens of women. Pickton targeted the most vulnerable, many Indigenous, many drug users. So many women he didn't appear to recognize photos of them in a police interview.
I don't know. There's so many people coming out of my face, I don't know.
Pickton's death shuts the door on the 74-year-old providing any more answers for those who, unlike the Freys, never received justice.
You know, there's a lot of families that never had their day in court and never will. And how can they, I can't imagine how they feel over this.
The Freys plan to be at BC Supreme Court next month, where the families are trying to prevent the RCMP from disposing of thousands of pieces of evidence in the Pickton case. A fight for justice, they say, will not end with Robert Pickton's death, only their own. Heather.
Andrew, thank you. The first former U.S. president to be convicted of felonies, Donald Trump unleashed fury in a 33-minute speech at Trump Tower. President Joe Biden now breaking his silence on the verdict, praising the Americans who sat on the jury. CTV's Judy Trin on the defiance a day after.
In front of supporters, former U.S. President Donald Trump, now convicted criminal, blamed the American justice system.
If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. These are bad people These are, in many cases, I believe, sick people.
In a unanimous verdict, Trump was found guilty of 34 offenses for falsifying records to conceal payments to a porn star. Trump downplayed the crime.
Hush money. It's not hush money. It's called the non-disclosure agreement.
Trump railed against the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor. He took no responsibility.
It was a rigged trial.
And it's reckless. It's dangerous. It's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years, and it literally is the cornerstone of America.
Trump was found guilty in a New York state court on state, not federal offenses. He's appealing the conviction, which doesn't appear to have tarnished his luster. Instead, it's a fundraising boost.
A record $39 million in about a 10-hour period.
He remains the presumptive Republican presidential nominee heading into November's election.
I'm still voting for Donald Trump. I think this whole thing has been a mockery.
I do hope that it sways people who do vote for him. I think that it definitely reflects on who he is and how he's going to be running the country.
So far, the Prime Minister has not commented on Trump's conviction. Usually, felons are not allowed to cross the border into Canada, but the federal government could give diplomatic approval, especially if Trump wins the election. Heather.
Judy, thanks. And there are questions over what this unprecedented conviction could mean for the upcoming U.S. presidential election. In an exclusive interview with CTV Question Period's Vassy Kapelos airing this Sunday, former FBI Director James Comey says a Trump victory is still possible, but this conviction will change someone's vote.
I think so. I don't know to what extent. It's another brick in the load of the picture that is this man whose former cabinet officials have said by the dozens should never be allowed near the Oval Office again. That message needs to get through to the American people. There shouldn't be any low information voters in America in November. And this is another piece of information that I hope will be useful to those who already haven't made up their minds.
Do you think it's possible he wins?
Oh, sure, it's possible. Hate to say that about my own country, but sure. I think it's very unlikely, but I think it's possible.
For more, we'll bring in CTV political analyst Eric Ham. How much of an impact will this conviction have, Eric? What happens now to the Republicans who were going to vote for him but have perhaps now changed their mind?
Look, we knew going into this process, this legal proceeding, there were voters who had already made clear that if Donald Trump was convicted on any crimes, on any charges, they would not support his candidacy. And now we have come to this moment where not only are many of those voters going to run away from Donald Trump, but we've also seen that Donald Trump has had a very difficult time unifying the base of his party. I think this only exacerbates his problems, not only with unifying the party, but also being able to attract many of those independent voters, voters that will be key to victory in November.
Do you think that's a sizable number, though, Eric?
It is when you consider this is going to be an election that will be won with a razor-thin margin. Remember, if we go back to 2020, this race came down to basically 3 states. We could see that once again. And when you're talking about margins that slim, every vote counts. And these criminal charges will certainly play into that.
Now, Eric, Trump today claimed he was a victim and launched attacks on the judge who will ultimately decide his fate. There are a lot of questions being raised about Trump's speech today.
There certainly are, as there should be. And I think the biggest issue surrounding the speech that he gave today is this is a man who continues to attack the judge who will be imposing a penalty on Donald Trump. And we don't know what that penalty is, but we know the severe charge of possibly 4 years, that's enough to keep Donald Trump off the campaign trail. And I think Donald Trump needs to be very careful as he continues to rail against this judge and this process.
Eric Ham, thank you. Another major headline from the U.S. tonight, President Joe Biden has taken the dramatic steps of going public with a deal being offered to Hamas to try to get a ceasefire and get hostages out of Gaza.
The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire. Phase 2, which is a permanent end to to hostilities. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence.
The plan also calls for all Israeli soldiers to leave Gaza and the release of all hostages held by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. The proposal is now with Hamas, with Qatar acting as a mediator. A device designed to start a fire was thrown at a Vancouver synagogue last night, prompting an increased police presence.
So somebody was actually able to put out the fire with their jacket.
Vancouver's Jewish Federation says nobody was injured. Vancouver police say extra officers are being positioned at some Jewish institutions. In a statement posted to social media, the province's Premier David Eby called the incident a disgusting act of anti-Semitism. Threats of violence and crime in downtown Ottawa have prompted drastic action by the Department of National Defence. It's now moving approximately 1,000 employees out of an office building in the city's core due to serious safety concerns. Workers say windows in the building have been smashed multiple times, and there have been several assaults. The relocation will begin in June and is expected to be finished by October. There is optimism tonight that prospective and existing homeowners could get some mortgage relief next week. The new GDP numbers out today paint a picture of a soft start to 2024 and an indicator of what lies ahead. CTV's Jeremy Sharon is breaking the numbers down for us at a very critical time. Jeremy.
Heather, this is the last key data report to be released ahead of next week's interest rate announcement from the Bank of Canada. And experts say the numbers make a strong case in favor of a Bank of Canada rate cut. While economic growth picked up to start 2024, today's GDP update fell quite short of analysts' expectations. The economy grew at an annualized rate of 1.7% in the first quarter, but the Bank of Canada had predicted an increase of 2.8%.
I think what today's GDP print really tells us is that the Canadian economy isn't falling into a deep slump or anything like that. Generally, it seems to be performing relatively well, but it's not as strong as the Bank of Canada had expected.
Economic growth is one key factor in a list of many the bank watches closely. But is it enough to push the Bank of Canada to drop its key rate, which has been stuck at a 23-year high of 5%?
There is enough slack out there in the economy that suggests inflation pressure is going to keep coming down. The labor market's going to keep kind of softening. And in response to that, the Bank of Canada probably has a green light to start cutting interest rates.
If the bank does move ahead with a rate cut, it will be the first since 2020. So this update was about as close to a win-win as possible if you're one of many looking for a rate cut. A positive start for the economy in 2024, but likely not strong enough to stop that much-anticipated rate cut from the Bank of Canada next week. Heather?
All right, Jeremy, thanks. It's been a horrifying ordeal for Quebec's Jajour family. After their beloved husband and father died on vacation in Cuba, his remains were mistakenly swapped with a stranger and buried in Russia. Now, 2 months later, his body has finally come home. His daughter says the family blames Cuban and Canadian authorities for what she calls negligence. Coming up, Tesla's seatbelt snafu. Thousands of vehicles on the recall radar. Plus, a 12-year-old prodigy stings competition with an epic spell-off. The fast food industry is cooking up some new ideas that go beyond the grill, with the biggest players using technology and home delivery to maintain an advantage. And right now, with the cost of living, budget is the biggest seller. CTV's Kathy Lee explains.
Fast food used to be the go-to for cheap eats, but not anymore, and customers aren't loving it.
It's all so expensive all the time that it hurts.
The higher price means more customers are staying home, and the chain restaurants are noticing.
McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Starbucks, KFC, inflationary pressures that customers have been under over the last several years are now finally starting to impact fast food restaurants.
20 to 30% more than before.
Customers in the United States expressed their anger on social media.
This is $3 worth of food. This
hash brown.
In response, a value meal competition to win back customers. A Bloomberg report first confirmed the Golden Arches will introduce a $5 value menu in the United States at the end of June for a month, and later reported Burger King will offer its own $5 value meal, but launch it before McDonald's and run a longer campaign. Burger King and McDonald's tell CTV News they're not currently offering the $5 value meal in Canada and didn't say if it will come in the future, though customers here want it.
That's super important because some people just do need to live off of fast food. There's just not other options for them. So no, absolutely think that that's a great idea.
The marketing expert I spoke to says the fast food chains will feel pressure to bring similar promotions to Canada because of the high cost of food here as well, and says these types of promotions are usually short-lived. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
There's important news for Tesla owners. The EV maker is recalling 125,000 vehicles in Canada and the U.S. over concerns the seatbelt warning light and chime may not activate. The recall includes certain vehicles made between 2012 and this year. The fix is a simple software update. Tesla says it's not aware of any collisions or injuries related to the issue. France has been on heightened security alert for weeks as it prepares for this summer's Olympics. Now, French authorities say they have foiled a plot targeting spectators attending Olympic soccer matches. An 18-year-old man from Chechnya who was arrested last week is facing terrorism charges. French authorities say his plan was inspired by the ideology of the Islamic State group. The Paris Olympics begin July 26th and run through August 11th. Still ahead, a second shot at the stars.
It's a test and development sort of effort.
Boeing's Starliner set to soar after a series of setbacks. There were more than a few tense moments at a prestigious spelling bee last night. It went right down to the wire with just the second spell off in the history of the competition.
M-Y-R-A-B-A-L-A-N-U-S.
Sinaf.
S-C-I-N-I-P-H.
Voussoir.
V-O-U-S-S-O-I-R.
Aposiopiesis.
A-P-O-S-I-O-P-E-S-I-S.
Abseil.
A-B-S-E-I-L.
Pathology.
Wow, 12-year-old Bruhat Soma spelled 29 very complicated words in just 90 seconds. This was the 7th grader's third time at the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Also winning big, the Blackberry movie. The satire cleaned up at the Canadian Screen Awards tonight.
Blackberry.
The team took home hardware for Best Picture with filmmaker Matt Johnson awarded the prize for achievement in direction, and actor Jay Baruchel named Best Lead Performer in a comedy film.
And I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you, thank you.
Meanwhile, Little Bird dominated the small screen, nabbing 2 trophies, Best Drama Series and Best Performer in a Drama Series. NASA is gearing up to send 2 of its astronauts to space this weekend after a failed mission this month. If successful, the critical flight could clear a path for future space pursuits. CTV's Allison Bamford explains.
NASA is knocking on the door of a historic mission.
5, 4.
The crewed flight test for this Boeing Starliner is the next step in certifying the spacecraft for future exploration.
The path to Starliner 1 clearly is the crewed flight test. That is the most important thing we have towards certification.
On board 2 NASA astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, who will stay at the International Space Station for 8 days, testing the Starliner's capabilities. From the ground, Canadian astronaut Joshua Kutrick will lead the communication between the space crew and NASA's Mission Control Center.
What we're actually trying to do here is achieve a second means of getting back and forth reliably, consistently to low Earth orbit.
The first and only other means is through SpaceX, but the Boeing spaceship, if certified, will launch Kutrick and 3 others into space as early as next year for the 6-month Starliner 1 mission.
It's a test and development sort of effort.
We'll be starting an estimated 65-minute hold at this time for flight crew egress.
The space agency called off the first crewed flight test attempt earlier this month due to a faulty oxygen valve that has since been fixed. But further inspection found a small helium leak that won't be repaired before liftoff.
The teams have, as always, continued to work diligently to ensure that when we do launch this test flight, we're ready to conduct it safely.
Besides a little wind that NASA is closely monitoring, the launch day forecast is a 90% go at Florida's Kennedy Space Center. Liftoff is scheduled just before 12:30 Eastern tomorrow afternoon. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
After the break, another dazzling display. Why forecasters are again pointing to the night sky. For those of you who missed the jaw-dropping northern lights earlier this month, tonight could be your chance to catch a dazzling display in the night sky. This time around, it won't be as powerful, but likely worth a look. CTV's Kamal Karamali explains.
Northern lights like Canadians have never seen before. The spectacle earlier this month that dazzled stargazers.
We had auroras in early May that NASA thinks might be the best auroras in 500 years.
Now likely another chance to see the aurora borealis tonight into Saturday morning, but this one expected to be much weaker.
There might be some faint lights on the northern horizon, perhaps.
Here's why. The geomagnetic storm from early May began with a giant storm on the sun called a sunspot. Solar flares blasted out large bundles of particles that slammed into Earth's magnetic field and guided them towards the north and south poles, producing the northern lights. Since then, the sunspot rotated with the sun. 3 weeks later, it's now facing Earth again, but weaker than it once was, spewing out fewer particles than last time around and likely to be a less direct hit to Earth's atmosphere.
Some models have it just glancing by Earth. Some models actually have it missing Earth just by a little bit as well.
Now, because tonight's geomagnetic storm won't be that powerful, you may just see a faint haze with your naked eye, so the advice is to view it with your camera lens, and that should make it much clearer.
That will then bring out more of the colors than you're actually able to see with just your eye, and then you can properly make everyone jealous.
But odds are there'll be more chances to view the northern lights, with a lot of sunspot activity expected later this year.
Every 11 years, it kind of gets a breakout of these sunspots, and then it dips down and there's not a lot of activity on the surface, and then 11 years after the last one, you get an outbreak of activity again.
With this amount of awe-inspiring activity not set to be seen again until 2035. Kamal Karamali, CTV News, Toronto.
It is a remarkable sight. That's our newscast for this Friday. I'm Heather Butts. Thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.